The Charlotte Podcast Festival is presented by Blumenthal Performing Arts, the Queen City Podcast Network, Eclecs Creative Agency, and WFAE, Charlotte's NPR news source, the home of acclaimed podcast Charlotte Talks, She Says, The List, Amplifier, Southbound, and FAQ City. Learn more about WFAE and our latest podcast, Work It, at WFAE.org.
Thank you and welcome to the Charlotte Podcast Festival. We are now in our second week, and Joni just told us that we had almost 12,000 people registered for the events coming up. So this is much bigger than we expected. Make sure you go out, and if there's some other sessions you want to attend, to register and sign up for those before they fill up. And while you're out there, grab you a t-shirt to support the effort. So I want to give a shout out to our sponsors today, Blumenthal, WFAE, as well as, WFAE, Queen City Podcast Network, Blumenthal Performing Arts, and Eclecs Creative Agency. We're going to talk today with Andy Goh from Goh Show Studios, who started podcasting back in 2014 and now helps other people to realize their podcasting dreams. And we're going to talk about audio editing with GarageBand. There's some other sessions that we've had, and another one coming up on some other audio editing software tools. So make sure you sign up for those if you are interested in more than learning about just GarageBand. Andy, we're going to turn it over to him. He's going to walk us through it and do a live demonstration of editing. I'd love to get your questions in the chat as we go. We'll have some time at the end to get questions from folks, but if you have questions as we go, feel free to use those, use the chat to give us those. Everybody practice it right now. You can go down at the bottom and see the chat button. Open up chat and just say hello, tell us who you are and where you're listening from. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the fantastic Andy Goh. Andy, how are you?
Hey, Kale, I'm doing good, man. Thanks for having me out here. And I want to say thanks to every one of you all for tuning in to the Charlotte Podcast Festival in its second week. Of course, sessions are going on all through October 30th. There's so many great things that you can learn about podcasting. And all the sessions are free, right? And all you have to do is just register online at charlottepodcastfestival.com, just like you've done today. So that does it for that. I want to just tell you a little bit about GarageBand here today. And we're going to do a little editing demonstration for you as well to get you up to speed on GarageBand. I'll tell you a little bit about GarageBand and me. First of all, when I first started podcasting, GarageBand was essentially the only software that I used. GarageBand and Audacity, Adobe Audition, they're all known as digital audio workstations, or DAWs for short, DAWs. So that's another thing that a lot of people call this type of software is digital audio workstation, or DAWs. GarageBand was the first DAW I ever really used, and I used it for the first 3, maybe 4 years of my podcast production career. I use Adobe Audition now, but GarageBand is still a fantastic piece of software for anybody who's getting started in podcasting, and also music production too, as it's really designed for that. But podcasting is really great to use in GarageBand because, first of all, GarageBand is free if you're on a Mac, and I'm assuming that everybody tuning in here right now is on a Mac. Otherwise, this session may not work very well for you, but it's free, and that's one of the best things you can use. All the other softwares, all the other DAWs out there, Pro Tools, Adobe Audition, they all cost a lot of money. So free is always good, especially when you're first getting started. The other thing I like about GarageBand is that it's really user-friendly. It's very intuitive to use. The user experience is, I think, very easy for beginners to pick up, people who haven't used any DAWs or don't have any experience editing. I think it's a fantastic piece of software because it doesn't load you down with a whole bunch of stuff that you don't really need. Especially if you're podcasting, there's only a handful of edits and things that you need to know. and from there, you can pretty much do whatever you need to do with your podcast in GarageBand. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I see that Kale has shared the link for some files that I'm going to be using to demonstrate our presentation here with today. So if you click that link that Kale has just put into the chat, you should have access to a Google Drive folder that just has 3 files in it, right? There should be 3 files in there. There should be a solo vocal track. There should be a track with Tom Hanchett's name in it, and also a music track called Shucks in there as well. So there's 3 files that we're going to be using here today to demonstrate GarageBand. And if you want to download those files and kind of pop up GarageBand in another window and work with those while I'm demonstrating, feel free to do that, because that's always a great way to learn, is to learn by doing at the same time. But don't feel like you have to either. If you just want to check out my presentation and just take notes, that's totally cool too. So whatever works best for you. But with that said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to get into just building a GarageBand track from scratch, again with the tracks that I showed you there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my GarageBand screen. And also, I will note that we did run into a few technical difficulties in trying to get the GarageBand sound working with Zoom here today. So we kind of have a little bit of a workaround. It may not be perfect, but it should be good enough to really demonstrate what we're doing here. So, okay, I've got just a regular track that I'm just working with here in GarageBand. This is just a generic track. So I am going to actually start a brand new track here for you so you can see what it looks like to start a track from the beginning. So if we have GarageBand open, and let's just say we go to New or Command N. I'm not going to save this because we don't need to save it. Oops. So that kicked me off my screen share because that closed the window. Let me see if I can't screen share again. Okay, cool. So now we should be seeing the generic new project screen in GarageBand. And we've got a couple of options here, but really we just want to start with this empty project right here. And again, I think it kicked me off my screen share. I think it happens here with GarageBand that it just, every time it opens a new window here, that we just kind of get some new screen sharing things that we got to roll with. But we should be able to see our track type selection now. So after we select, start a new track, we should be able to see, or start a new project, we should see this screen right here. Now, this is where we're going to choose some of the inputs that we have for our podcast. Now, real quick, I want to give you a heads up on what I'm using to talk to you here today, and also a setup that I think works really well, just in general, for people that are recording their podcast remotely or just by themselves. All I'm using here is just a Samson Q2U. Let me actually stop my screen share here so you can see it a little bit better. But this Samson Q2U is about $65 to $100 on Amazon that you can get right now. It's a really fantastic USB microphone. So as you can see here, there's a little USB wire that plugs directly into the computer. And then I also have my headphones plugged in here too. So you can use both the input and output devices on a Samson Q2U to record your podcast with. And because it has the USB cable, that way I don't have to worry about having a digital interface to plug into my computer. Now, normally, as you can see here, it has a XLR input, which most microphones do have. XLR is the standard microphone input. There's no XLR input on your computer, so you would have to have a digital interface to connect those two. But again, with the Samson Q2U, which you can find for about $65 on Amazon, that's a perfect podcasting microphone. And as you could probably tell, it sounds really good too. The sound quality is very fantastic for recording podcasts. So let me get back into my screen share. And the reason, again, why I wanted to show you what I was using here is because on this screen, this is where we're going to actually have to select what input we're using. So right now, as we can see, we have selected record using a microphone or line input. That's really what we want to be working with here for our podcast. Again, GarageBand is set up for music. That's why we've got software instrumentals and drummers and all that sort of stuff. We don't need any of that stuff with our podcast. We just want to use the input, the Samson Q2U microphone, as we see it here. So right now, as long as we have that selected, we're going to go ahead and click Create. Oh, and don't, there we go again. GarageBand's being funny about this, the screen share thing, but that's okay. We're smarter than GarageBand, so we're not going to let that deter us. Again, if y'all have any questions about anything that we go over here in this session, please don't be shy about just putting those questions into the chat. Kale's going to be keeping an eye on all your questions, so if there's anything that you want me to go over or anything you want me to repeat, please feel free to put that in the chat whenever you want. Okay, so this is the default screen that we get here with GarageBand. And the first thing that I like to do is I like to close this library of sounds on the left because, again, that's really more of a music sort of thing, music production sort of thing. I don't really use it. So to close that, all I have to do is just go up here to Library, this button right here, and just click that, and then it goes away. Again, if I click it again, there's our sound library. But again, for podcasting, I really don't feel like we need to use that much for what we're trying to do. So that leaves us with two sort of windows here. We've got our track window, our multi-track window, which right now we just have this one track, audio 1. Of course, that's good. That's good for us to hang on to. But what we're going to be doing is building a multi-track project where we're actually going to introduce other tracks, music, and other vocals, and maybe a scratch track too. We'll show you how to do that here in just a second. And then, of course, yeah.
Just a question in the chat about which
Sure.
template you selected, and also asking about the podcast template, whether or not that's a good one to use.
Yeah, the podcast template is another good one to use. I like to just start from scratch just because that's showing you how all the different tracks are built. But if you pop open the podcast template, I know that it comes with a couple of different tracks made for podcasting, a couple of vocal tracks and music tracks. So feel free to use that template as well.
Which one did you open here?
This would have been just the new empty project. This would have been an empty project.
Great.
So if you're starting a brand new project, there should have been an option for just empty project, and that's where we're starting from. So the second, and this bottom window that we're looking at here, there's a couple of things that you can do here. You can either work with the EQ on a track, or you can also use this as a way to zoom in on a specific track. So the way that we would swap back and forth between that is with these two buttons up here in the top left. So right now we can see we've got the little dial selected for the dial button selected, which is giving us our EQ window. But if we were to select the scissors here, it would actually give us this window, which would zoom in on our selected track. Now, right now, we don't have anything in that track, which is why you don't see anything here. So we're just going to keep that on the EQ window for now. Now, the next thing that we need to do before we start bringing in audio and before we start bringing in music and things like that is we actually need to go up here and change what sort of format in the display that we're looking at. Right now, as we can see, this is really formatted to be a music track, right? It's actually measuring time, not in seconds and minutes, but in beats and measures. And that is not going to do anything for us in terms of podcasting, because we don't think of it in terms of beats or measures. So if we go up here to this really small little drop down window up by the display HUD, right where it says 4x4 C major, this little drop down window we can select, and we'll go to time. And if we do that, now we can see that our time bar here has changed from counting measures and bars to now counting at seconds, right? So let me just switch back to where we were before. Beats and project, right? So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and so forth. That is all counting the measures of a song. But again, that doesn't do us any good because we're working with a podcast. We're going to change it back to time, and now we see it's counting in seconds. So 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, so on and so forth. The next thing that I want to do is, you see these purple these purple buttons up here in the top right next to that. We want to turn those off. That's our metronome. And again, we do not need to keep a 4/4 beat with our podcasting. It's podcasting. We're just doing a human conversation here, which doesn't have to be on a 4/4 beat. So we're going to turn those off, because if they were on and we tried to record or play, we would hear that 1, 2, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and again, that's music. We don't want that. So that's what we want to kind of set our track up with here when we're getting started. So the next thing that we want to do is then add a few more tracks, right? So we've got our audio 1 track right here, which is just a straight audio track that doesn't have any effects or anything on it. That's good. I generally like to record or set up these multi-track sessions with as neutral settings as possible, and then add in the EQ and such later. So first of all, to add a new track, all we have to do is just go up here to this button up in the top left, and that's going to give us the same sort of option screen that we had a minute ago in terms of choosing what track type we want. Now, for our purposes, again, with a podcast, I feel that it's always easiest to just create these generic audio tracks. So just by using a microphone or line input to record, we're just going to hit create. And that gives us another track. It also pops up that annoying sound library again. By the way, I do want to make a quick note here too, that my GarageBand version may not look like your GarageBand version exactly. There's different versions of GarageBand floating out there, depending on if you've upgraded to the newest one, or maybe you're working with an older version. That does happen to be the case, where there could be a couple of different versions floating out there. So if yours doesn't look exactly like mine, just keep that in mind. So I'm going to make one more track here. So I'm going to click on the plus sign again, and we're going to just create a new line input track. And now we've got 3 tracks here: audio 1, audio 2, and audio 3. Also, we're going to close the library again, because we just don't need to be working with that at the moment. So we've got our 3 tracks now, and we're ready to start inputting audio. So what
Quick question just about the change in the setting you did to the time. Folks are asking,
Sure.
Is there a way to set it so that it's right going forward, or if you use the podcast template, will that change it so you don't have to change that each time?
That as soon as you change, I know as soon as you change it in that project and you save it, it will save that setting as it is. And I do believe that is the default setting in the podcast template.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right, so now what we want to do here is we want to actually import some audio from our computer. Obviously, we can also record into GarageBand too, but what I've done here is I have, and I'll show you how to record into GarageBand in a little bit, but what I've done here is I've given you a couple of audio files that you can actually import into GarageBand. So all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, let me do this first of all. Let me stop share, and let me actually share my desktop here instead of just my GarageBand window. All right, so you should be able to see, again, my GarageBand window, but also my screen, my whole desktop. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm just gonna open up my Finder window. I'm gonna go to my downloads. And then right here, you can see, oops, I actually need to download the other audio file myself. But we've got 2 of the files here that we are gonna be working with in this project. So the first one here, Shucks by Shafe, is our music project. So all I'm gonna do with that is I'm actually just going to click and drag it into the project. And as you can see, when I do that, the track just appears here into this middle track. Now, same thing with the Tom Hanchett clips. I'm going to do that, but I'm going to click and drag and bring it into the top track here, because I want my top track to be my vocal track. Now, this is where we get into the concept of what's called non-linear editing, right? So non-linear editing is this digital form of editing that we see here, where we can layer different tracks of audio and edit them at any point in the project that we want. Now, of course, linear editing would be the old school way of actually having tape and reels and having to cut tape and splice it and all of that sort of stuff. Now, thank goodness we don't have to do that. We have all of these. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and download my solo vocal tracks. We have all of these. We have this technology at our hands that allows us to be able to work with these files however we wish. And that's, of course, really great because tape and reel is a lot more of a pain in the butt. Let me just bring it back to our track here. Now, while that's downloading, that shouldn't take too long, I'm actually going to rename these tracks, right? So that's going to help us keep track of, no pun intended, keep track of what we're working with here. So this first track, I'm just going to right click on it. That's going to give us some options here. I'm just going to go to rename the track, and I'm just going to call this one vocals. Again, you can rename these tracks however you wish, but I like to just rename them to something basic. So this music track, I'm just going to rename as music. Now this third track, audio 3 down here, I'm actually going to rename it to, and I'm going to rename it Scratch Track. Now this gets into just something that's my own personal preference when editing audio, but I like what I call a scratch track, which is something that I just keep as basically a way to put things off to the side, right? So when I'm editing audio, I like to use the analogy of cooking a lot. So editing a podcast is a lot like cooking a meal, all right? So you have to have kitchen counter space to where you can chop up your vegetables, you can, prepare your stocks, maybe chop the meat up, whatever, season it, whatever. But then as you cook a meal, of course, you need to put some things to the side where they're just hanging out until you're ready to put them into the oven or into the burner, whatever. And that's really what a scratch track is. It's an area where you can put stuff off to the side without having to, worry about it too much. So for example, what I like to do is I like to keep it muted. These buttons right over here, by the way, this is mute and this is solo. And the way that you use those is if you have a track on mute, that will keep everything in that track completely muted throughout the mix. If you have it on solo, that's going to do the opposite. That's going to mute everything else and highlight just that one track. So I'll show you in a little bit more detail how to chop up audio, but real quick, I'm just going to separate this one track and put it down here. Now, this part of Tom Hanchett's clip, if I didn't want that to be in my mix, I would just put it in my scratch track, keep it muted, and then you can see how it's grayed out as opposed to everything else here, which is in color. Now, again, if I wanted to solo that track, it would look like that. It would be in color while everything else would be grayed out. So I did that real quick. Now I'm going to give you a keyboard command. Keyboard commands are always really some of the best way to be able to edit. It's the smoothest and quickest workflow that you can kind of build for yourself. The keyboard command of Command Z on your Mac. Command Z is one of the best keyboard commands you can use because that's undo, right? So if I hit Command Z, if I hit it just once, it's just going to move the track back to where it was. And then if I hit it again, it's going to erase that cut that I just made. So Command Z is your best friend when it comes to editing, because that's undo. And you will be making, of course, plenty of mistakes while you do this. So being able to hit Command Z a couple of times definitely helps. All right, now, before we move forward, by the way, I'm going to keep my scratch track on mute over here. Before we move forward, the next thing that we really need to do is we really need to be able to move throughout this track. So, yes.
Sorry, two quick questions.
Sure.
One, there's a request if you could, is there a way to refresh your screen? It's a little bit grainy on the screen share side.
Sure, let me just hit stop screen share. I'm just going to screen share back to my GarageBand.
Yeah, the other was how you cut the track. Can you walk through that briefly?
Yes, I will do that in just a second. I just wanted to demonstrate that real quick. Before I do that, I want to show people how to move throughout GarageBand, and then we'll talk about splicing tracks.
Perfect.
So the first thing that you need to know is, of course, when you're looking at this track, you're just looking at it from one perspective. You can zoom out and look at the entire track as a whole, or you can zoom in and look at one very specific part of the track. And that's going to be really important because sometimes you need to make big sweeping changes where you're moving whole sections of audio around, and sometimes you need to make very specific surgical changes to where you're going to have to zoom in. So there's a couple of ways that you can zoom in and zoom out. So first of all, this little slider right here up in the top right, if you click and drag this will zoom in and zoom out for you. So if you move the slider all the way to the left, this is as zoomed out as you could possibly be, right? So the Tom Hanchett clips, that's our longest track. As you can see, it's about 15 minutes long. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at 15 minutes worth of audio. And again, if I just click and zoom in here, now I'm looking at about 10 seconds worth of audio. So that's one way that you can do it. Now, if you're using a trackpad, which I really actually recommend for audio editing, you can also do the pinch and zoom thing on your trackpad. You can't see me doing this, obviously, but just imagine me just pinching and zooming on my trackpad. That's actually a really easy way to do that as well. Now, also, when you're pinching and zooming or you're using the slider, take note of where the playhead is. The playhead is this vertical line that you can see me moving around the track right now. Some people call it a masthead as well. But the playhead essentially is where any sort of action will happen when you splice a track or when you zoom in or zoom out. It's when I zoom in anywhere in the track, it's going to keep it centered on wherever this masthead is, right? We can zoom in really close if we want to, or we can zoom very far away. And again, wherever this masthead is, that's where the action is going to happen. You were asking again earlier how to splice tracks. Here's a quick keyboard command. It's Command T. Now, Command T will make a splice in the track wherever you have your masthead, right? So if I want to isolate just a small portion of this dialogue, I would put my masthead here at 719. I would press Command T on my keyboard. Then I would come over here at 717 and press, oops, I have to highlight it too. I have to highlight the track I want to splice, but once I have it highlighted, I just press Command T again, and now we've just isolated that piece of audio. I'm going to hit Command Z a couple of times to undo that, but that's a really important conceptual thing to keep in mind, is that wherever this playhead is, wherever this masthead is, that's where the action is going to happen whenever you're splicing or zooming in and zooming out. That's just a really good thing to keep in mind. And by the way, as you can tell here, moving the masthead around, you do that by just clicking in this little margin right here. You can't click up in the actual numbers or down here in the tracks. It has to be in this super narrow strip of ledger right here. So here's a great example. That's a big, that right there between 420 and 450 is just a big piece of silence, right? We know that that's silence because what we're doing is we're looking at a waveform. The waveforms, from 450 and beyond are all good because that's a vocal track, and we can see that. But we can see right here between 420 and 450, that's basically silence. So if I wanted to eliminate that, all I'd have to do is put my playhead here, make sure the track is highlighted, hit Command T, and then put my playhead here, do the same thing, and now we can isolate that silence. I'm just going to hit Delete on my keyboard, and there we go. It's gone. Not forever, because if I hit undo, there it is again.
A couple of questions, Andy, about the part you're on now. Alicia asked you, can you stretch the track to re-add portions that way that were previously cut, or do you have to manually add it back from the scratch track?
Well, Alicia, that's a great question, and you must have been reading my mind because that was literally the next thing I was about to demonstrate. So let's say that we delete this little track of audio right here. One other way that we can manipulate these audio regions is with something called the top and tail tool. So top and tail. And what that is if I bring my cursor over here to the bottom left of the track, or if we're looking at this track over here, the bottom right, either end of the margins, you can see how the cursor changes to a sort of bracket icon now, right? We've got that bracket and then the left right arrows. So what happens here is if I click and I drag, I can bring all of that audio back into play just by clicking and dragging. Same thing over here on this end too, right? So what we did is when we deleted that bit of audio region, we didn't remove it necessarily. We just kind of de-highlighted it. We just took it out of the mix. It's still there, right? We can see it. It's still there, but we can bring it back with the topping and tail tool. Now, again, the reason why it's called topping and tailing is because this would, right here, would be known as topping your audio, taking off the top of your audio. And over here, this would be known as tailing your audio, or taking off the tail end of your audio. That's really helpful because, you know, most of the time when you record something, there's always a few bits of silence on the front end and the back end, or chatter or whatever else. And that's a really easy way to be able to take that out of the mix. So the topping and tailing tool, and then also your Command T splicing tool are the easiest ways to splice your audio, or to cut your audio, I should say.
And is there a shortcut to move in the playhead?
I would just click wherever in the region you want it to be. Just zoom in to wherever you want to be and just click here and there. You can also, you know, drag it if you wanted to, but honestly, just clicking at whatever point in the region I find is probably the easiest thing. Let's zoom in again, and while we're on the topic of kind of splicing audio, let's talk about how you would join two disparate pieces of audio together, right? Because we always want to be able to join audio if we need to. So first of all, let's just isolate, say, this audio region right here, and then let's also isolate the audio region just to the right of it. So now we have these two pieces of audio. Now, if these are just floating around in the space, and by the way, this is a great opportunity to emphasize that these nonlinear editing tracks are really what you see is what you get, right? Because I can click and drag these pieces to whatever point in the track that I want, right? If I want this to be the first thing that somebody hears, all I have to do is just click and drag and bring it all the way over here, right? And now we can see that, you know, this you know, sort of wider Tom Hanchett track, it's right at 14 seconds. If I wanted it to be at 20 seconds, I would just move it back here to where it says 20. So it's really what you see is what you get, right? In that sense, that makes it very easy conceptually to think about, okay, I want my intro dialogue to be at 5 seconds. I want the interview to start at 55 seconds. I want my ad read to come up at 6 minutes and 30 seconds. And all you do there is just, again, place these regions around to wherever they need to be in that track. You know, if I want this clip to start at 5 minutes, it's just a click and a drag away. Okay, we're just going to back up a little bit on some of those because, again, I have a larger sort of demonstration I'm trying to make. But so if we want to take two pieces of audio and join them together, right, like we have here, what I need to do, first of all, is I need to make them adjacent to each other. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to click and I'm going to drag, and now we can see they're adjacent to one another, right? Let's go ahead and mute this music track here so we can, you know, we have the emphasis on what we're looking for. But we've got two tracks here that are adjacent now, and they're adjacent at the place that I want to join them. Fantastic. Now the next step is I actually need to highlight the other audio region too. So these regions by themselves, and I like to call them regions, they're not tracks. The whole track is a track, but these little regions are what we're working with. If we have them adjacent to each other, we need to highlight both of them at the same time. And the way that we do that is we highlight one of the tracks. As you can see, this one on the right is highlighted, 15, clips 15 here. And then all I'm going to do is I'm hold down Shift, and I'm going to click on the other track. So that's what's known as a shift click, right? So I've got one track highlighted. Oops, let's just highlight off of them. And then I hold down shift and I click the other track. That's a shift click. Now they're both highlighted. They're both highlighted. They're both adjacent. Now we're ready to join the track. There's two ways you can do this. One is with the, if you go up here to track and you go to, let's see, oops. I thought that there should be, I thought that there was a, there it is, join regions. It's in edit, I'm sorry. So right here, down here, if you go to edit, you can actually see the two, keyboard commands that I use. We've got Command T to split the tracks, and then Command J right here to join the regions. So I can just hit join regions by clicking in the menu, or I can just use my keyboard command, which is, again, my preferred method. It's going to give you this little warning message that says that you have to create a new audio region, which is fine. So you just click create, and boom. Now we have a completely new region of audio that we can move around and do whatever we want to with. Now I'm just going to hit command. I'm going to just hit my undo button a couple of times, just to undo that and get us back to where we were. But that is how you join two regions together. So basically, if you know how to do that, right? If you know how to splice a track and then, cut a track, and then you know how to join two tracks together, that's all you need to know in terms of removing whole sections of dialogue, or removing ums or ahs or long pauses like we did there. That's it. That will take care of 75% of the edits that you need to make in your podcast when you're talking about, especially stuff like just, tightening up your conversation or removing redundancies, things like that. That will take care of 75% of the stuff that you need to know, is just knowing how to cut a track and then knowing how to join them together. Caleb, do we got any questions about that so far?
Yeah, just a couple not specific to the editing. Tom says these are great. How about, is there a way to quickly get to the end of a track, to fast forward to the end of a track?
Yeah, I believe, I don't know off the top of my head, but there should be a keyboard command for it. I just don't know what it is. And I'm on my laptop here, so I don't think I can use it, but I think Command End takes you to the end of your track. Just like, a lot of these keyboard commands are similar throughout all different types of software. Like Command Z is undo in just about any piece of software that you use. So I believe that Command End will do that for you.
Doug just chimed in and said, select all right arrow. So we're crowdsourcing.
Select all right arrow. See, this is great. I'm learning stuff too about, about the software that I didn't know. So that works too. Actually, let's try it.
Can you remind folks again how you select both tracks to be joined?
Sure. So again, let's just make a quick cut right here. Command T. So now we've got two different tracks, right? All we have to do is make them adjacent to one another. Adjacent meaning they have to be touching. And then we need to highlight one track and then the next track by shift clicking. So what I'll do here is I'll hold down shift on my keyboard and then I'll click. And now you can see how both tracks are highlighted. That's how you, and then I would hit Command J after that to join those two regions together. I'm not going to do that right now because that will take too long, but that's how you would join those two tracks together. Again, just knowing how to cut a piece of audio and then join it together, especially with the topping and tailing tool, that's at least 50 to 60% of all the edits you will ever make in your podcasting sort of thing.
Maybe you're going to get to this, but a couple people asked about merging different tracks together.
Merging different tracks together. So is that, that be different from merging the regions together like we've been doing, correct?
Yeah, I'm assuming that means if you wanted to merge the vocals and the music tracks that you have there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So let's talk about this. Conceptually, what we're doing here is we're working in a multi-track project, right? Now, if we were to go up here and save this project, we would not be saving the actual audio that we would then want to upload into the internet. We would actually just be saving the GarageBand project file, which all it's doing is just showing us, it is just saying, hey, here's where the audio regions are, and here's what the settings you have for them. It's not the actual file that you can, upload into the internet. What you're talking about, or I think that the question is getting at, is how do we export the whole track, right? So how do we smush it all together into one MP3 that we can then upload into the internet? So I'll just show you real quick kind of how to do that. What you'd want to do is up in your window, up in your file bar here, you want to go to Share. And I don't know if you can see the menus that I'm bringing down here, but you would click on Share, and then it's going to bring down a little menu, and you're going to want to click on Export Song to Disk. Once you click on that, this window is going to show up here. And so on this window, you can rename the track, right? So we're just going to rename this GarageBand 101. You can also determine where it exports to. I will just choose the desktop for now. And then something really, really important right here is the format that you're exporting. You can see here how there's a couple of different options, right? You've got AAC, MP3, AIFF, and WAV. You always, in my best Chris Tucker voice, you want to choose MP3. So always want to be selecting MP3, and never, ever AAC, AIF, or WAV. And the reason why is because MP3 is compressed audio, and that's really important. Compressed audio allows for streaming over the internet. So anytime you're streaming music on Pandora or Spotify, you're streaming MP3 files. WAV and AIFF are uncompressed audio files, which makes the sound quality better because it's more true to form, but it also makes those files exponentially larger. A 30-minute podcast, might be 60 to 70 megabytes, but that same podcast as a WAV or AIFF might be, 600 to 700 megabytes. So that is obviously not good for streaming. So always import as MP3 or export as MP3, and then also choose the highest quality export available, 256K. That's basically CD level quality audio, and then you would hit export. And then that will export the MP3 file that you will then eventually upload to your hosting, which will then be pushed out to Apple Podcasts and everywhere else. So I think that's what the question asked, but either way, that's an important sort of thing to keep in mind, is that once you've got your music and you've got your dialogue and everything else in the place that you want it to, that you are able to export it as an MP3 and export it the way that you want to.
Yeah, the final output is definitely important. I think there's still a couple questions though about, so is there a way to merge tracks within the project together? So for example, in Audacity, I know that's one of the options. If I want to work with fewer tracks, or if I want to combine two tracks once I've edited them.
I think I'm having a little bit of trouble here, just kind of conceptually like getting the question in mind, because like if I wanted to, first of all, when you're working in multi-tracks, the reason why you have multiple tracks is so that you can edit them independently of each other, and you can EQ your vocal tracks differently than your music track, and you can also make things like sound beds and whatnot. So just conceptually speaking, you want to have your tracks separate. If I did want to, say, put my music track in my dialogue track, I could just move it up here. But again, that's going to make it so that I can't have my vocal track layered on top of my music track. So again, I don't think I'm answering the question, but I don't think I'm quite conceptually getting the question either. So I'm just going to keep going here with this multi-track thing, because there's a few other things that I want to show you here. We only got about 10 minutes left, and hopefully I can get a few minutes of Q&A after that. So last thing that I'm going to do here is I'm going to import my solo vocal tracks, right? We're going to put those in there. Now, if you have been listening to the tracks as we've been importing them, then you've probably heard that this is my introduction. This is my, hey, welcome into GarageBand 101. I'm your host, Andy Goh, all that sort of stuff. So that's what's in this solo vocal track right here. And again, what we can do with that is that I've got three things in it, really. I've got a introduction, I've got an ad read, and then I've got an outro. And just because I know where these all are separated at, I can go ahead and just use my Command T function to separate them all out. So again, we've got an intro, we've got an ad read, and then we've also got an outro. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to try and kind of put those, generally speaking, where they need to be, right? So my outro needs to go back here, and I put another piece of music here for my outro. And then I've also got an ad read. Let's do this. I don't know, I forget what's actually here, but we've got a big piece of silence right here. So I'm just going to delete this silence, or I'm just going to make a splice right here. I'm going to delete that silence. And then I am going to move my ad read in between these two things. So what I'm going to do here is basically construct a mid-roll ad read that we can use for this ad. So if I do that, now our podcast is kind of taking shape, right? We've got our intro over here. That's these two tracks, or these two pieces. And then we've got our first segment, which, you know, that's about 5 minutes of audio from Tom. And then we've got our ad read right here. That's these two guys right here. Our second segment, a little bit more audio with Tom. And then our outro is down here. So this is, again, illustrating that concept of what you see is what you get. We want to refine this, of course, and tighten it up, but this is the general sort of look that our podcast is going to want to have while we're editing it. So let me go back here and zoom in on our intro. And what I want to show you guys now is this is something known as automation. So automation is what we use to create music beds, fade-ins, and fade-outs. And again, this is where editing in a multi-track really helps, because this is where we can layer our music and our vocals together. So what we want to do here is I want to put my intro. Let's just hear what our intro sounds like. I'm just going to solo our intro. Let's just hear what it sounds like. Welcome to GarageBand 101, the official podcast of the Charlotte Podcast Festival. I'm your host, Andy Goh. All right, we get it. But where do we want to put that in our track? I mean, that's got to be up front. I feel like I don't want it to be the very first thing my listener hears, but maybe it's like, you know, about 5 or so seconds in. So if that's the case, I'm just going to put my track right here, and we can see that it starts at 5 seconds. But now the problem that I'm running into here is that the music is going to be loud enough that it's actually going to wash out that vocal, right? So let's hear what that sounds like. I can't even hear what I'm saying, right? Because the music is too loud. So how do we get the music to get the volume a little bit lower while I'm speaking, and then raise back up when nobody's speaking? So the way that we do that is with automation. And how do we do that? We go up here to mix, and then we go to show automation. So up in your file window, where file, edit, track, and record and all that is, you should be able to go to mix and then show automation. And then that's actually going to bring up this little yellow line in the middle of each of your tracks. And what you can do with this little yellow line is you can control the volume with it. So as we can see, the line as it is flat all the way across the track, but it's about 2/3 of the way up the track. And so what that means is that it's at a nice, even listening volume. Wherever you see that line at 2/3 of the way up the track, that's where you know that is going to be at a nice, even sort of listening volume at. Now, what we want to do, however, is we want to make a little bit of a valley in that track. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my cursor, and I'm going to put a few automation points in the line. And all you have to do that is just click in the places where you want these automation points. So I've made 2 automation points in our track already, right? I've made one here, and then I made one here. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the back end of the region. Now again, I'm putting these in the music track, but it's with the idea that, you know, it's obviously with the vocal track, the time of the vocal track above it in mind. So now I've got 2 more automation points over here. The thing is that these automation points act like pivots, yeah, like a scissor would, right? So no matter wherever these points are is going to affect the line on the left and the right of those points. So I've got these 4 points, but I've only got the inside 2 highlighted. And what happens if I highlight just those 2 middle points? I can drag them down, and now you can see how that creates a valley in essence, right? So wherever, since this line down here is lower, it's going to lower the volume of that track in that place. So let's hear what that sounds like. Welcome to Garage Band 101, the official podcast of the Charlotte Podcast Festival. I'm your host, Andy Goh. Today, we're going to be hearing from Dr. Tom Hanshin, former staff historian at the Levine Museum of the New South, talking about the history of several Charlotte neighborhoods. Let's take a listen. All right, and again, I know that the audio system setup that we're using here isn't perfect, but hopefully you could hear there how the mix was a lot better, right? The mix being everything that's in the audio at once. The music, because it was lower, was able to accommodate my voice a lot better than if we just had it at the same volume, right? So those automation points are really, really important. Now, same thing over here. What if I wanted to create a fade out? So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my top and tail tool to just take off some of this audio right here. Let's do a nice, let's go to about here. Now, what I can do is I can bring in my main dialogue like this, right? And I'll put it right about here. Now, again, this is where the creative, this is where you can be creative about your podcast and change, where the time is and everything else. But I like a nice little 5-second gap here in between dialogue. And then with my automation points, I'm just going to do the same thing that I did last time.
Can you talk through that slowly? What you're doing?
Yeah. So what I did was because I want a little 5-second gap here between my introduction and where the meat of that first segment of audio starts, I'm just going to make a little 5-second gap right here. I'm just going to bring my dialogue track to right about 5 seconds after this track ends. And then as you can see, I'm using my automation points here to make the volume, or keep the volume at its regular level here, but then I make it lower down here. Again, same sort of concept. I want the dialogue to just come through real nice and easy here once Tom starts speaking, and then we're just going to create a couple of more automation points there, and that's how we can create a fade out, right? That's how we can fade that track out to nothing in a nice smooth motion by using the automation points. So let's hit play real quick and see how that sounds.
Great. Well, thanks, Tom, for doing this. Let's kind of just walk through the history a little bit of where Myers Park came from. You talked a little bit about what was Myers Park before it was Myers Park.
And now the audio should just fade right out.
And in the early 20th century, that's when southern cities started to sort out. That's when segregation, both racially and economically.
So one more thing about automation points, and then we'll just go to Q&A because I know we're pretty much up on time. You can select multiple automation points at once just by clicking and dragging. That'll highlight those automation points, and then you can move them in unison, which is a lot easier than trying to use them. You move them one at a time. All right, I'm going to drop the screen share, and just if we have any time for any more questions, I'll be happy to answer those. So, Cale, I'll let you know kind of what we need.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. The first one is, where would you suggest people go if they want more detailed instruction or guidance around using some of the tools and techniques in GarageBand? Sure, definitely.
YouTube University is the best. And when I say YouTube University, I'm just referring to YouTube in general, but there's a lot of great GarageBand tutorial videos out there that if you just search for GarageBand tutorials, podcast editing, there's a ton of them out there. I will hopefully be creating some of that content myself here pretty soon, so I can send you to my GarageBand videos, but that is forthcoming. But again, YouTube is the best place to do it. Again, I am completely self-taught, especially when it came to GarageBand. I self-taught myself everything. I don't have an audio engineering degree. I never edited video or anything before that. So again, it takes some time, right? You know, it takes some time watching the videos and putting the stuff into practice. But most of what we went over here today is going to get you, 90% of where you need to go for editing with GarageBand.
All right. Michaela gave a shout out for your skill pop.
Thanks, Michaela.
And then what you just showed us with the show automation could also be used for a fade in as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, if I just go back to my screen share here, if I went to the beginning here, right, and I just wanted a quick fade in, like right now, the music just kind of starts. But if I wanted to use my automation points, right, I could do something like this. And then let's see, let's just bring that one all the way down. Let's bring this one like halfway down. Now we've got a little bit of a curve because we're fancy like that. Let's see what that sounds like. Let's maybe even spread these out a little bit just to get a little bit more of that. Sort of. Right. So yeah, again, it's, you may not be able to hear that the best, but again, yes, that's how you would use those automation points to do that. Automation points, you can create fade ins, fade outs, and music beds. And that's going to add just such a great level of, production and quality to your recordings.
Great. I know we're at time, but Andy, do you have some time to answer a couple additional questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
For folks that are able to hang on, we'll go through a couple more questions, any that you got in the chat. And for those that need to leave, thank you so much for being a part of the session, and hope to see you at several others, including this Friday. We've got the happy hour, so we'll get to network with a lot of other podcasters throughout. So one question came up from someone about, let me find the question and ask it. It was for an investigative podcast. I've lost it. So let me ask a different question. Is there a way to normalize, this is from Alicia, way to normalize the sound within a specific section of a track? For example, if there's like a loud burst, is there an easy way to normalize?
Yeah. So that's actually when I like to bring in Audacity. Audacity I use in conjunction with GarageBand a lot. And it's also a free piece of software and works on Mac and PC. So if you're using GarageBand, I really, really, really recommend also using Audacity too, because there's some great noise, or just sound editing features like a normalization or like a noise reduction. The noise reduction feature on Audacity is really high quality. And I would take those pieces of audio and put them in Audacity and use the noise reduction and normalization features in Audacity, export that file, and then import that one into GarageBand. The one place that GarageBand I think kind of fails is that it doesn't really do good at manipulating the actual audio regions themselves. Like I find it less easy to EQ and compress and all that stuff in GarageBand than I do in Audacity. So what I like to do is I like to brush up and polish up those audio files in Audacity, then import them into GarageBand and do all the mixing and mastering there.
So there was another question about equalizing. So if you had two speakers and wanted to make sure that they were on the same level of loudness, would you do that in Audacity, or is there a way to do that in GarageBand?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So that's that actually gets to the whole heart of why multi-track editing is important, is because if you can create multiple tracks for your guests, then you can have different EQ settings and volume settings for each guest. Perfect example is if you have one person that's just way louder than the other person, right? If you had both people in one stereo recording, which is kind of what which is exactly what we were working with in this demonstration. then you can't really turn one person up without turning the other person down. You could go in there and like, play with the automation points and make one person louder than the other person, but that is a huge pain in the butt, and I would never really recommend that as a solution. But if you have one person in one track and another person in another track, now you can EQ them separately. Now you can boost one person's volume to match the other person's. Really great stuff, and definitely the advantage of editing in a multi-track recorder.
Okay. Is there a way to automatically do that, or do you just need to listen to it and manually adjust it?
That is probably best done manually, I think. If you can create your 2 tracks, it's as easy as just, listening to it and then really just bumping up the volume of one track over the other. So
Okay.
here, let me actually demonstrate that real quick.
All right.
Okay, so for example, like if I was to just duplicate this track right here, let's say we have a second person speaking down here, right? Oops. Let's say we have a second person speaking down here. All I have to do is I can give them a little bit of gain right here, and you can see how it moves the automation point up. And if this person's too loud, I can just dip their volume down a little bit here, right? So that way, this track right here is going to be louder than this track. But if this person's naturally louder, now that just basically makes it a little bit more even.
Okay.
Right. And then, of course, if you have that, you can then bring up your EQ region, which we didn't really get into. But again, you can EQ it all from here, right? I can add some more low end, take some mid range out, things like that. You can EQ it separately for each person.
That's a game changer. I have a very loud co-host. So
yeah, no, and that's a great point. You want people to be as even as possible.
Great. This is a question from Rachel about, would GarageBand work for an investigative type podcast with a lot more mixing involved than traditional interview type? And what would be the benefits of Logic Pro versus sticking with GarageBand? Thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. So the answer is yeah. You could absolutely put together like a Serial or a This American Life type of podcast in GarageBand. I used to have a really good example of that. If you've listened to my podcast with Bernadette Joy on Crush This Debt, or Dear Bernadette Joy, I think is what she calls it now. That is very much in that sort of editorial narrative line where you've got music and then you've got narration, you've got sound effects, ambient sound, all this sort of stuff kind of weaved into one. You can absolutely do that in GarageBand. I would say though that if you're and there's no function that you would need that's not in GarageBand necessarily, but if you are really kind of serious about that level of audio production and editing, I would recommend Adobe Audition. Pro Tools is great. That's really more, I think it's better for musicians though. I really think that that's a better software for people trying to make music. If you're trying to make a podcast, Adobe Audition is meant to use dialogue, and it's really meant for radio production and everything else. And that's gonna be a little bit more true to form, I think.
We have a panel on Adobe Audition tomorrow, Thursday at noon. So you can check that one out if you want to learn more about Adobe Audition. This question is about, it says, we've been using Rodecaster Pro mixing desk with 2 studio mics.
Fantastic.
And interviewing guests through Zoom, feeding it all into GarageBand. Following Rode's template, the mics are set to mono, but the USB to stereo. Will this cause us a problem, is the question.
No. What you should be doing is, I mean, that's a good way to have the setup. Your vocals should be all in mono, when they're in a single channel like that. And then what the Rodecaster does when it sends it to stereo. Now, let me ask you this. Are you using the multi-track function in the Rodecaster? Because what you can do is you can actually, if you set up a new GarageBand window, you can actually make a separate track for each microphone that you're using, and then you can send from the Rodecaster the signal from mic 1 and mic 2 into their own separate tracks right away. That's the setting that I would really be looking at. You can find that under hardware. Oh gosh, I'd have to look it up, but I know it's under hardware. If you can find the multi-track setting, and you set your multi-track for USB, you can actually set that up to record directly into GarageBand that way. And I think that's the easiest way to do it.
Great. And there was a lot of discussion about your headphones. What headphones are you using?
Well, okay. So, I'm glad y'all are asking about the hardware here, because I think this is a better illustration of the idea that you don't need to spend thousands of dollars on pro level equipment to get good sounding audio. Again, I'm just using a $65 USB microphone, and these Sony headphones, I can almost guarantee you, are no more than $30 on Amazon or wherever. Actually, I didn't even buy these. I think these, I don't even remember where I got them. They're just over-the-ear headphones that are just good enough to hear basic stuff when I'm coming in. Now, back home, I do have a nice set of Shure headphones that's like $150 or so. That's what I use when I'm editing, when I'm really deep in the weeds and I really want to EQ stuff right and everything else. But for the most part, when you're recording and even when you're editing too, just anything that's good, anything that's over the ear like this is going to be fine. You really need to just look out for big things like distortion or background noise, or making sure that your guests stay on mic so that they can be heard. So honestly, anything over the ears that's you don't need to spend any more than $30 for something like that. It'll work just fine. But again, that's such a great illustration of the fact that you can be anywhere. You could be sitting on the patio of a log cabin in Nashville and still make great audio content if you have good microphone technique and kind of what you're doing.
Great. You want to tell everybody where you are right now?
Yeah, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina. Had to get away from the city for a couple of days. It's peak color changing season here in the mountains, so I feel like that's a good time to be here.
Molly says hi. She's next door.
Hey, Molly.
And we'll let this be the last question. Terry Page wanted to clarify. Are you saying that voices should be in mono and music in stereo? Is that what you'd recommend?
Oh, okay. I get what you're getting at now. Either way, honestly, I would keep the music in stereo because your music track might have stereo elements to it, but generally your vocal tracks are all going to be better as mono tracks. So yeah, keep your music track stereo and your vocal tracks mono, and then just keep it like that when you mix down, and that should be good.
Okay, I said that was the last one, but Kristen is.
That's fine.
What's the difference between the yellow automation line and the slider on the left under the track name in terms of manipulating and changing the audio?
Let me see. What was that again? The yellow automation line and the slider on the left. Oh no, so they're intertwined, right? They're intertwined. If I go back to my screen share here, you can see how they move along with the slider, all right? But again, with the slider, you're keeping that in one place, and you need to use the automation points to move that slider around automatically. So, like for instance, if I go back here to my music track and let's solo the music track, watch the slider on the left as the track goes and as it kind of traverses those automation points. Right, so that's really just like having your hand on the dial as the track is playing, but instead of you actually having to turn the dial in real time, it's doing it for you. So that's really all it is.
All right. Well, obviously we could talk a lot, so feel free to reach out to us after, and there'll be lots more conversation and lots more panels and sessions for you to take care of. Big round of applause for Andy Goh. Thank you so much for being a part of this. Check him out at Gojo Studios. And thanks everybody for being a part of this. I hope you sign up for more sessions. We see you this Friday at the Hangout, the happy hour. Check us out at Queen City Comedy. We have actually some sessions this month, some workshops where you can about creating podcast content and creating comedy podcasts from some great names. So check us out at Queen City Comedy. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, Kale. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of this festival.